Hi, everyone, and welcome to China EVs and More, where my co host, Lei Xing, and I will go over the week's most important and interesting news coming out of the China EV, AV, and mobility sectors. We will open the room up at around the 40-minute mark to anyone who's keen to ask us any questions. What Lei and I discussed today is based on our opinions and should not be taken as investment advice. If you enjoy this room, please help us get the word out to other enthusiasts, and of course, tune in again next week. My name is Tu Lei, and I am the Managing Director at NIO Tu Insights, a Beijing-based consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility sectors. I write a free weekly newsletter that we pull many of our discussion topics from. You can sign up for it at NIOTuinsights.com, which of course I encourage you all to do. Lei, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, Tu, and good morning from my side. This is your co-host Lei Xing, former chief editor of China Auto Review. This is episode number 58. So the biggest news of this week is probably Auto China 2022 getting delayed until June. Still no official word yet, but the word on the street is that the announcement is imminent, right?
And there's no guarantee that it's June.
Well, let's hope it it is. I mean, I hear that at least in Beijing and the surrounding areas, there was some announcement from the officials that it's being stabilized for now, but the numbers are still, across the country are still flaring up, right?
So Jilin has 90% of all cases, I guess, all new cases.
Yeah.
So Jilin province.
And then I guess Shanghai and Shenzhen are somewhat returning to not normal, but right?
Yeah, they're getting out of lockdown, but there's been some stops and starts. A friend of mine who lives in Gubei, I think I told you this, he was in lockdown for 3 days, got out of lockdown for a day, and went back into it.
So anyways, back to some of the headlines. We're going to get into the NIO earnings in a bit, but the other big news was obviously Giga Berlin starting production and delivery of the first Model Ys. And
that's a huge accomplishment. He's on multiple continents, and hundreds of thousands of cars are going to come out of 3 regions for him now, right? So
yeah, and in what, less than 2 weeks or in 2 weeks, Giga Austin, Texas goes online, right? So boom, 2 new plants. And then quite a few battery news this past week with, Volkswagen announcing their third Giga in Spain. And then that joint venture between Mercedes, Stellantis, and Toto, right? The ACC, that's like 120 gigawatt hours. News here in the U.S., Volkswagen's $7.5 billion investment over the next 5 years. And then Cadillac getting that job 1 of the Lyric in Tennessee, right?
This is despite all of the hustle that they've probably had to deal with to be able to get to job 1 is quite an accomplishment, I think, right? Because Spring Hill is a brand new factory for them effectively, right?
Yeah. Building other Cadillacs. So anyway, if we have time, we can, talk a little bit about the new hydrogen development plan, which announced some major targets. And then all the chatter has been about price raises of EVs. And it seems that everyone but NIO has increased prices. And then big news from BYD, working with NVIDIA, working with Shell, teaming up on that charging ecosystem. And that's for China and Europe. So that's an interesting play. And then the Li Auto L9 teased more details.
Yeah.
I think one that stood out for me was the 215 kilometer range on the battery mode, which is like more than enough everywhere a BEV itself, right? I feel.
Yeah.
So that's humongous numbers.
I tweeted that I went to Li Auto
and
visited
I was just gonna say,
the facility.
So you're going to have the Li 1 for 2 weeks?
About a week.
Okay.
I might get it back so I can go on a road trip for Qingming tomb sweeping holiday the following week, right? Not this weekend, but the next weekend.
Yeah. Have fun, man.
And so, yeah.
You got
so we're gonna take it up to Mutianyu tomorrow morning and do a little hiking. So
and you got that baby blue color, which I really like. It's a bit. I don't know if that's your taste, but it's a.
That's not really my taste.
I didn't think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I kind of wrote about it. Initial impressions. I didn't know what to expect, and there was a gentleman that I know. I've known for about 4 years. He was at Mercedes before. He is now part of Li Auto, and so that was a happy surprise to see him. See, he had moved over. He told me, and I don't know if I'm supposed to tell you this, but he told me there's a handful of Lawai there, or foreigners that are working there now. So, but only recently, and they're very excited about the L9. A little disappointed about the auto show, but they're going to have their own event on April 16th, I think, right? So,
yeah, I think regardless, these companies are going to do their brand events or launch events, regardless.
Yeah.
Of what the when the auto show will be held. So yeah, and
I have to admit, Lei, that I might have seen one or two camouflaged mule L9s when I stopped by yesterday. So
oh, cool. I mean,
and of course the Baoan, the door guys were like, "You can't take pictures. You can't take pictures." They were like grabbing my phone. They were grabbing my phone. I was like getting upset. I was like, dude.
Yeah.
But a couple things about the NIO, about the not raising price. I think they have a bit more flexibility because their contract manufacturing actually out. So the costs, they purchased the car effectively from JAC. And so JAC is managing that cost on their behalf. The second thing is when you take the battery out, that's 30% of the cost of the car, 25, 30% of the cost of the car. So they're not paying for that. That's shared cost if it's sharing, right? And so they have a bit more flexibility, I believe, on the margin part than some of the traditional EV makers that are their competitors. So, but I do see them recalculating or reconciling, like Li Bin said during the earnings call, the new features, they'll probably just disguise covering some of that cost into the new features, right?
Yeah, and so perfect, segue to get into the NIO earnings. But I mean, back to Li Auto, I think they're the least sort of the internationalized startup among the three, right? Among NIO and XPeng. So they must be, boosting up their global talent,
Yeah.
But back to NIO. Yeah, you mentioned, one of the things that was talked about was this, how they're going to deal with the price increases. And it looks like their strategy is not going to increase prices of current models, but they might launch new model year versions with adjusted prices. So that's an interesting tactic. I think you said a while that they are dealing with this a bit differently than some of the other competitors.
So in my experience dealing with purchase orders, Lei, let's say for instance they've negotiated pricing for wholesale pricing with JAC for each vehicle that's manufactured, and there's normally a buffer, a 5-10% cost buffer that says I'll eat this cost as the contract manufacturer up until X percent. And then I'm going to have to update pricing or, reconcile pricing. And so they're probably pushing that cost. They're probably forcing JAC to eat that cost. And then JAC in turn is probably trying to get cost reductions somewhere else, right?
And So this earnings call, I feel like since they've become public, I mean, there's quality earnings calls. I feel like this was the one that had the most, what's the word, numbers that were revealed.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of new information, which I think looking back at NIO's, whether it's stock performance or its delivery performance, it hasn't been as expected. Maybe a lot of people think that they're falling behind a little bit, but you can feel that. Granted, right, that last year really there was no new model. Though
Right.
it was interesting, there was 2 NIO days last year, right? One was held in January and one held in December,
Yeah.
revealing the ET7 and ET5, but there was no new model launched. So last year was a bit of like a, saving for for kind of what William referred to as a re-accelerating year in 2022.
Yeah.
So now they have 3 products. So you can feel that he's trying to send a message, though I don't think that the stock market is giving it any love. I think it's down
No.
pre-market, but really, I mean, some of the numbers that were thrown out were really like 30,000 swaps a day. It's
Sure.
ridiculous. There's 86,000 seconds a day, so 30,000 swaps a day means every 3 seconds roughly there's a swap at the peak. It's not average, but at the peak, right? So it's a little bit of mind-boggling. And then they talked about the ES7 positioning, right? Addressing the so-called mid and large 5-seater SUV market, competing with the X5, which has an addressable market of 200,000 units. And then the margins, right? You talked about the margins, how they're dealing with the margins. Interestingly, because Q3, they had the regulatory credits,
Right.
or the NEV credits that kind of artificially increased the margins a little bit.
Yeah.
And overall margin actually went down a little bit. But vehicle margin, it looks like they're going to be in the 18 to 20% range. And then
I have to make a comment about how they are comparing the ES7 to the X5 because that's a little psychology on. So the Li Auto guys were also saying, the Li One is going to compete or is competing against the X5, but at a much lower price point, right?
Yeah.
And so that's really psychology because they want you to associate their vehicle with that car, right? Because BMW is kind of sort of the 800-pound gorilla that they're trying to target. And so, because we don't know anything about the S7, we don't know what it looks like. And so when they imply that, oh, we're competing against, they're trying to plant a seed in your head so you associate when that car comes out with the X5. So they might also benchmark the X5, but they're trying to convince you that this is the premium car that's going to compete with the X5, which is great.
Yeah. And also the cadence for the ET5 and the ES7 are a bit of interesting because ET5 is September delivery starts and ES7 is Q3. So roughly at the same time, right?
And these are at the same factories, right?
The ET5 is at the new NIO Park.
NIO Park.
While everything else is at the current JAC NIO.
Still, man, that's I wrote on Twitter, it's like stacked, right?
William Li, he talked about this question on some media reporting that they've gotten 15,000 orders for the ET7, and he's like, no, we're much more than that, but we won't reveal the order numbers. So that gives you some indication of in terms of their delivery volume expectations, and I think he's alluded that basically they can keep up the current roughly 10,000 a month with the 3 products. So you can sort of extrapolate, right, the ideal how much more they can do per month.
Well, the other thing too is that the ET7 is a sedan. The other cars are SUVs or coupe SUVs, right, or crossovers. So there's not going to be any cannibalized vehicles.
But for better part of this year, ET7 is going to be a big driver, right? Because the other 2 models won't be delivered until right, September or late Q3. So really,
and the ET7 will get people into showrooms too.
Yeah.
So.
And then the other thing that he talked about was this mass brand, right? Positioning in the 30,000 to 50,000 price range. And it's important to point out that he said basically it's a whole new game. So fundamentally from everything, right? Manufacturing efficiencies. So I think that's why their R&D this year will be double last year, which was 4.1 billion.
Right.
So roughly 8 billion RMB in R&D. I think that's still setting up for the mass brand products.
Yeah, so that mass brand is gonna take up a lot of that capacity so that they can focus lower sales, higher margin on the NIO products, right?
Yeah. And NIO, I think it's the first Chinese smart EV startup to announce a target to achieve profit, right? That's also an indication of sending a message, right?
Well,
right,
that's because
to the investors.
Wall Street is see it to believe it, right?
Yeah,
So
and that's so full year profitability in 2024, and that's 10 years after they're founded. I don't remember what the numbers for Tesla, but it's probably more than that, right?
sure, yep,
I think
for sure.
right, Tesla only achieved profitability
14 or 15 years.
Right. So they've only done that a couple of years ago, right? And so lots of and then the jobs per hour, which is I think a sensitive number for you having worked at plants, right? The
Yeah,
60 JPH is I think it's like a
that's 1 a minute,
yeah.
right?
So
So 500 cars a shift,
yeah,
effectively. Two shifts, 1,000 cars a day,
yeah.
right?
So I think
That's
mhm.
That's pretty good. With they normally calculate 250 to 275 days of work a year. So that's a factory that's building almost 300,000 cars a year. So
Yeah. So overall, I think it's just sending messages, right? Whether it's comparing with the X5 or the future profitability. I'm since they've gone public, I've never heard this much new info reveal on an earnings call.
yeah, they've become old pros at, right?
Yeah, and I've always said this: NIO is due, right? And I think the thing that why the stocks is going down because I think the stock market obviously they look at the near term performance. So Q1 guidance wasn't particularly
Yeah.
well. I mean, 25,000 to 26,000, and the revenue side, I think people are looking for much better numbers.
I think that NIO should be credited because in this environment, first of all, for them to stack and to maintain that stacked launch schedule later this year is pretty bold. I would say it's pretty bold because it's a brand new plant, it's a brand new facility that they haven't even broken in yet. That is probably going to be their highest runner, right? From a car sales standpoint, the ET5. So you could argue that it's their most important car. And the ES7, we'll find out more about it, but it's another SUV, so how excited can you really get? I don't know, unless it comes with a lot of different features or new features that are not yet part of the ES6, ES8, and EC6.
Yeah, but based on the numbering system, it's got to be between the 6 and the 8. And William basically he said it's not going to cannibalize the current models. So
of course it's going to cannibalize the current models. Of course it is. But the other thing too that he actually said 30 to 50. XPeng was listening to that, right? He's basically implying that we're coming right at you, XPeng, and they can't be the most technologically advanced mass market vehicle because XPeng has taken that positioning in China. So are they going to be affordable, amazing design? Is it going to be, a derivative and watered down version of the NIO brand, or is it going to come and position itself a little bit differently? So that'll be interesting to see.
Also, their NIO is taking a entirely different approach in the sense that he always refers to the mass brand as a NIO to the mass brand as Lexus to Toyota, Audi or Porsche to Volkswagen. But he's going the reverse way, right? So going from high end to low end, whereas all the other ones, right, including legacies, they've gone from the low end to the high end.
Sure.
So that's a different strategy, and we'll see how and if it works.
Effectively, he's doing the Tesla. I mean, with the exception of Tesla creating a brand new brand, because the Model 3 and the Model Y drives the volume by far, right? 90% and over 90% of sales for Tesla is 3 and Y. So the S and X are halo cars.
Yeah.
So
And it's also interesting to point out what he mentioned on the chip shortage. He basically said there's challenges, of course, but specifically the chip challenges lies in actually the basic sort of the chips, like the TIs and the Infineons, rather than the NVIDIAs and the Qualcomm A155s. And battery, he even said batteries, there's actually, it will match demand, working with CATL. But the chip is really actually these, the so-called basic chips.
yeah, because the specialized chips are, number one, they're more expensive, so they less products, less technology products use them. But these control chips and less specialized chips, everybody uses them for the most part, right? Generally speaking. So they're going to be 60-70% of the production or fab, and 50% of the fab production, and then consumer products are going to want them, EVs are going to want them. So that's why it's not just a car company automotive demand thing, it's a consumers products high technology product demand thing. So
Yeah, and he's saying they have more than 1,000 chips in every car, and 10% of that roughly are being, disrupted by the supply chain issues.
yeah,
So
and you saw this week that Intel effectively committed almost 100 billion US dollars to opening a factory or a fab in Germany. But again, those things don't come online for 3 years, right? And they cost 3, 4, $5 billion to build. So
and the other thing he kind of commented on was the lithium spot prices. He's basically saying it's a lot of speculations going on rather than than the supply demand problem. And then the other number I thought was interesting, that their R&D personnel was going to increase to 9,000 this year, right? Plus the doubling of the R&D spend year on year. And I remember a few years ago when he talked about their employees. This was right after they've gotten
funding.
the funding. I think they had less than 10,000 employees total, roughly at that time, and now they're going to increase the R&D alone to like 9,000 people. So yeah, it's a bit interesting. And then just other than that, the swap numbers are ridiculous.
Yeah, it's the palladium, nickel, and aluminum that are causing the raw material cost to increase significantly. So
Yeah, but in summary, it really looks like last year was a bit of a setting up for this year, and this year we're supposed to see better numbers, whether it's deliveries or margins.
surprisingly, did you hear that much or anything about the international or foreign market update?
No, he's just saying that
I didn't hear that much.
they're ready to hit the ground running in the foreign markets: Germany, Netherlands, Sweden, and Denmark. So right.
I have to say that taking so long, a year effectively from the introduction of the ET7 to actually launching it, I think they were pretty lucky and they're pretty skilled to be able to get that much excitement out of it after taking so long to get it to production. So, kudos to them, because normally there's something else they're thinking about, but it just goes to show that NIO is a brand that seems to resonate and people want it to do well, and at least initial impression of the ET7 is that it's going to continue reinforcing everything about the brand and create goodwill among their new potential customers. The other thing too is that mass market brand they could use the current 600,000 or 700,000 people on their app who can't really afford an ES8 or an ES6, and then try to sell them the cheaper brand, right? So there's a reason to have so many active users on that app, even if they can't yet afford the NIO branded vehicles. So that could be a masterstroke if they could translate that stickiness into sales of the mass market brand.
And back to the European markets, I think this year we need to keep in mind that their number one goal is to establish the brand in those markets and not really looking at significant volumes. I think this was touched upon in the earnings calls as well. And there's basically saying, establishing the brand and the volume and the share will come naturally. That's what I think Steven said.
Yeah, they have to,
So, still most of the volume will still come from China, but next year we should see, how they do, especially in Germany, right? What kind of a feedback and momentum they get in there.
Yeah, I think the Germans that feel that the Chinese cars don't hold up on the quality and they can see the design, but the fit and finish, how the materials feel and stuff like that. I think they're going to be very, very shocked that the Chinese companies have really, really, really stepped up. And to your point about not really forcing the issue with sales, we've said this before in this podcast. There's two things in a person's life that are an emotional buy: a house and a car. And it's going to take some time to get NIO positioned well in the European markets. And so that's why they needed to marinate a little bit, and they need to do a little road show and show the Europeans that, man, this is a pretty cool car. And then it also gives them a chance to sort out the charging station situation, sort out the swapping station situation. So, there's a method to that madness to go a little bit slower. And they're a premium brand, so they don't need to be in your face to sell 3x what a BYD might need to sell or an Xpeng might need to sell eventually at the lower price point in order to get the same kind of bang for your buck. So
yeah, I think that's enough about NIO.
Yeah, let's move on to your embargoed Mercedes.
Okay, so this was a technology and innovation day event that was supposed to be held back in January at the CES, but
is this annual? They have this annually?
No, I think this was to kind of piggyback on the EQXX reveal.
Okay,
right? That was the first new car reveal this year in the auto industry, right? Ahead of CES, and they were trying to hold a event to talk about their efficiency, and really that efficiency is the new luxury by giving time back to customers.
Okay.
Right. So through the demonstration of, for example, the Drive Pilot level 3 and also the level 4 AVP parking. Yeah, so this was delayed due to the Omicron early in the year. So it was going to be held in LA anyways. But I think what was the most memorable was the Drive Pilot L3. And I'm going to use underwhelming to describe this experience. And I mean it in a positive way.
Okay.
Rather than a negative way. Underwhelming meaning, you don't see the bells and whistles. Everything's behind it. It just works. You just hit a button and it works. And right, I think that's what I mean by underwhelming. And that's actually good, I think, and really I think I understand more about the difference between L2 and L3. And I think we should emphasize that, I talked to this engineer, he's a systems engineer who drove the car, and I rode and I talked to him. He's like, he's been working on the Drive Pilot L3 program since the end of 2016. Okay, so more than 5 years. And he said L3, to achieve L3 is 10 times harder than L2.
Yeah, for sure.
And also to emphasize the reason why L3 is called conditionally automated driving, because when you go into L3, it's not that you can start do everything besides driving. It's not like that, because the system OD, there's always an ODD, right? So the requirements, there's plenty of requirements why this is called conditionally automated driving. First, you got to have the regulatory framework, so which Germany passed last year, right? So they can drive on these 13,000 kilometers of autobahn or highways.
Right.
It must be divided highways. It's under 60 kilometers per hour or roughly 40 miles per hour. The car has to be able to see the lane markings on the highways, and you can only look at the center the screen for extended period of time. You can't look back or talk to people facing other directions.
Okay.
So these are all the kind of the conditions that you have to, meet
Fulfill.
for it to work. And the California freeways are perfect for this. During one, like in LA, the traffic's just between 1 and 5 p.m. It's on the 405 or on the 10 I-10. It was funny because I talked to him and it's like, this is a feature where we say, "Oh, I love the traffic," right? Other times you don't love the traffic, and it's basically just giving back time to you. You can watch YouTube, you can do emails, you can do conference, but there's a DMS that watches kind of where your views are, where you're looking at.
Right.
So I think they've tuned the system to really make it, it's not jerky. It drives like a human.
Okay.
And the most important fact is that Mercedes will be responsible in an L3 mode in terms of an accident. So I think this, and when you compare it with all the, whether it's Tesla, whether it's the FSD, or whether it's the City NGP, whatever that the Chinese smart EV startups are pushing out, that those are still L2 because you have to pay attention. So Mercedes is ahead. And I think that was the message that they're trying to, but it's taken a long time, right?
In all fairness, they're a luxury vehicle brand.
Yeah.
So they should be ahead.
Yeah.
Quite frankly.
Yeah.
Right? Because the highest technology features always normally come out with the most expensive cars. So now the US has passed these regulations as well? Not yet, right?
No, they're waiting for approval that's expected by the end of this year. So only in California and Nevada at the beginning. So they're working on this and they're expecting that approval toward the year end.
And basically only in mass in summertime, spring, and late fall, because in the wintertime you can't see the lanes.
Yeah, that's why they have,
stuff,
that's
right?
why the sensor setup is quite interesting, right? They have the front cameras as well as the cameras on the rear view mirrors that look down at the kind of the lane markings. And then in the back, they have to have this rear facing camera that sees, emergency vehicles. This is part of the
right.
I guess the system design that there's an emergency vehicle, your car, you have to yield, right?
Yep.
To let them pass through. And there's
in 2 years, I would say, let's say 2 years, 30 months, there's probably going to be some V2X automatic communication between the vehicles from an emergency vehicle standpoint.
Yeah.
So,
and so they have this positioning systems using the 3 major satellites. So I think they're GPS, GNSS, and then GONASS, GONASS. That's the European system. So once they go into China, they will have to obviously work with the fourth
China's
one.
system.
Yeah, work with the fourth one. I mean, the engineer, he told me that. And then
because China has its own version of GPS.
Beidou, I think so. Beidou.
Yes, Beidou. So is it LiDAR? Is there LiDAR?
Yeah, LiDAR. That was actually interesting. They brought a guy from Valeo, which supplies the Scala second generation Scala, so Scala 2 LiDAR that's placed on the grill. And I talked to some of their engineers, asked about the positioning and basically comparing how these Chinese smart EV startups have this watchtower putting on top. And basically they said, our aim is to have this sensor setup to achieve the desired L3 driving, this specific ODD, and placing that LiDAR in the grill works for the specific Mercedes Drive Pilot. Whereas the Chinese smart EV startups, they put it on top because of what they're trying to achieve, the city level, still L2 automated driving as a redundancy, right? So the approach, there's no right or wrong, but it's just depending on what you're trying to achieve. So they said it's enough putting it in the grill one for L3. And going back to my use the underwhelming word, think of it, it's really if you put it in simple terms, it's basically ACC in one lane, but you can look away. That difference is actually very hard to achieve. And when you look away, the car will be responsible for accidents. Then for Mercedes, they have to be confident enough to be able to say that. And I think that's a huge step.
Did they put a governor on the top speed?
The ODD currently is 60 kilometers per hour, and they said in the future this could be increased. But for what they're trying to achieve with this version of the Drive Pilot, it's 60 kilometers per hour.
But you can't use it in city driving.
No, because divided highways, these divided highways has to have these high definition maps covered. So the system will know. If you try to activate in city levels, it won't work because of the positioning system, because of the requirements. Geofence. So underwhelming in a sense that it's really limited. But in the case of stop and go traffic on the highways, it gives you some time to do something else, right? That's the intent.
Yeah. Well, technically, if we're going to give credit to somebody, it should be Honda. Honda was with the Legend in Japan.
Well,
was
Audi
the first
had it.
L3, right?
But they didn't have the regulatory framework. So, really, I think these legacies, you can sense that they really spend a lot of time. The negative word would be conservative, but they're really different than the startups because they want to put safety first. It's a methodical approach. Very amount of time that is spent on developing the system, right?
But it goes back to also when we spoke with Maxwell, how L2 and L3 would need different hardware than L4.
Exactly.
So you can't use the same car. Well, supposedly, according to Maxwell, that you can't use the same hardware, software to go from L3 to L4.
That's an interesting point because based on what I've heard and what the presser said, the same Drive Pilot setup, the sensor setup, can actually, so they also showed the Bosch AVP, right? So the same setup can actually be upgraded to achieve the level 4 AVP. But then again, the caveat is this AVP is infrastructure based, which means you have to have the Bosch industrial lidars on the ground sort of as a rail guiding the car. Yeah. So that's a caveat, and that's what they showed in one of the...
But you're saying when you say upgrade, you actually mean an OTA flash software update.
Well, no. The AVP they showed is basically relying pretty much 100% on the infrastructure. And they showed this at one of the hotels in downtown LA.
So the V2X. The V2X part.
It's exactly V2X.
The other interesting thing, Lei, that LiDAR that they used in the middle of the grill. So I was told that they put them high because they're cheaper. They're not like super expensive and so high quality, right? And so when they're lower, they can't function as well. I'm talking about the AV startups, right?
So the LiDAR setup is very interesting. It's right below the radar on the grill. There's a big black square of the radar, and then right below that square, there's actually two spots. So on the right, there's a LiDAR. On the left, there's this kind of thing that's shaped similar to a LiDAR, but the reason they did this was so that it looks symmetrical. Inside that left one is actually just a camera. But from afar, it looks like they have two LiDARs, but really there's only one LiDAR.
So how many sensors? The going rate's like 35, right?
40? Oh, yeah, it's right. In the front, so there's the front-facing cameras, there's the LiDARs, there's radars, there's the ultrasonic sensors, there's the corner radars, and then on the rear view mirrors, there's the cameras. In the back, there's the positioning system, there's the rear-facing camera, and then the corner radar. But it's pretty integrated pretty well. But I'll say these are test vehicles, and if you look into the trunk, you do not want to look in there of all the computing and the wires that they have in there.
And they're using NVIDIA chips.
NVIDIA, right, to help.
So
I think the numbers that they gave was continuous measurement was like 3 gigabytes per minute. And there's another metric. I forgot the name, that was like over 30 gigabyte per minute.
Okay. Did they mention if they're going to charge for this? Is it an upgrade or is it standard as part of?
It's an option, so of course they're going
Okay.
to charge. I didn't ask about the pricing, but it's for S class, right?
Is it a service charge like every month we're going to charge you, or is it like I'm going to buy this feature and own it?
I didn't ask about that, but I got the sense that they're also moving toward this kind of a subscription.
Yeah, the recurring revenue
Yeah.
model.
And other than that, it's just seeing the EQXX. They had a deep dive of how they developed this car, and there's tons of details. Like even the car, I think it was Bridgestone that helped with the tires.
Yep.
How the
Noise?
no the tire, how they're designed, the lines on the tires.
Okay. Yeah.
Even those improve, right? The drag,
Sure.
efficiency.
Yeah, for sure. You'd be amazed. You and I speak with engineers and car guys all the time, but like, for some of our audience who are just more enthusiasts, like to go from a petrol engine to an electric vehicle, there's so many differences, right? The windows can be a little bit thinner because the noise of the vehicle is not there. And whenever you have an ICE, the car vibrates. So if you're an electric vehicle, you have to put sound deadener in there. You have to reinforce the frame in order to make that not vibrate, so the user or the driver or the passengers don't feel it. So there's all these different implications of having a petrol engine vehicle versus an electric vehicle. And for a user, it doesn't matter, right? You just want something that works, that reacts the way you expect it to. And so, like you said, this guy's been working on this, and at least at the prototype standpoint, he did a pretty good job, or his team did a pretty good job, because you were very underwhelmed, which is what he wanted, probably, right?
Yeah, I mean in a good way, not a negative way. You don't notice anything when it goes into. It drives like a human.
Yeah.
The only thing was the space in front. He said the system design was 2 seconds, so it will be farther away than what you would normally do when you're in a stop and go traffic. You would normally follow quite closely, right? But there's a big gap in the front, and you see cars, not cutting in, but kind of, changing lanes. But he said, while you're doing something else in this type of situation, you don't care. You don't care if people cut in.
He's definitely gonna have to change that for China.
Yeah. I mean, in China, people, but again, people get agitated when
you get half a meter between cars in China. Somebody's gonna cut in.
Yeah.
So the other thing I wanted to ask you about, Lei, was the BYD shell. Was that surprising to you? Was that pretty non-starter, or what do you think about that partnership that they announced?
Well, not surprising, but seeing a traditional oil company is a bit, you can sense that they're trying to get on the ship, right, of this transformation, that you would be working with Shell. When you talk about Shell, you talk about gas stations, right? You think of gas stations, not charging, but right, they're transforming.
And well, all of them are, right?
Yeah. Total.
BP has, Total. Well, it's a French company, so if I was talking to a French person, I would say Total.
Total, yeah.
And now it's Total Energy, right?
Yeah.
So it rebranded itself. And then BP and I think Shell had also acquired charging infrastructure companies in Europe.
Yeah.
So,
and also what Electrify America announced, their new designs, charging designs, right? Charger designs, and I think they went a little bit overboard putting on like these coffee shops and stuff. I think for EV customer, if it was me, the number one priority is that these would just work and I can plug it in and charge and leave, rather than coming up with all these bells and whistles.
Yeah.
And so these Volkswagen, he put up a video, right, of the plug and charge that will be available, right, on our Ionity network. It's due. It's overdue. Charging should be more convenient than filling up gas, right?
He is so out in front with that stuff, man. It's awesome.
And I think that's what these, BYD and Shell is part of what they're trying to achieve. Not only working together, put the coverage, but also making sure that there's a convenience part of it.
Well, and then maybe it's not happening as much at this very moment, but they're all talking out of both sides of their mouth as the lobbyists in Washington and Frankfurt for those companies are pushing out every type of clean energy bill that they can in order to milk the petrol and the oil for as long as they can. They're trying to market themselves by acquiring these companies and partnering with these companies to get that green credibility, right?
So, yeah. And Shell, this is very strategic. Hey, I'm partnering with BYD, China's number one, right, EV company. And we're gonna, they're setting up a joint venture to put up 10,000 charging points in Shenzhen alone. Right? I think that was from the presser. The JV expected to operate a network of more than 10,000 charging points in Shenzhen with a plan to expand to more locations. So Shell, they want to be associated with these companies, green, EVs, BYD, right? So
yeah, I still want to see some progress or at least movement on the US side. It just doesn't seem like there's just a ton going on. Announcements are being made by chip companies, battery companies. I think who Ontario and Stellantis. I think
right, ACC.
Stellantis. Yeah. Mm-hmm. They're building battery capacity. Mexico, there was another brand, and they're going to build some battery capacity in Mexico, I think. So these are all good indications. But man, everything just still seems so unpredictable when it comes to the United States, at least, because I'm fearful that there just isn't enough good product, right? We hear you and I talk about probably 5 or 6 products for the last year and not that many brands, right?
Products as well as this conundrum that what's going on in the channels that here in the right, prices going up is one thing, and then dealers charging that markup. And we talk about affordable EVs. That's far from happening. Right, $30,000 EV. There's nothing right now. Average prices are well over 50,000, 60,000.
Dude, you don't even say it's just the dealers marking it up, man. Rivian marks up their cars.
Yeah. No, I'm saying that right. So it's
that brings us to the end of this week's show. Lei and I thank you for tuning in. My name is Tu Lei, and you can find me on Twitter at Sino Auto Insight. That's SinoAutoInsight. You can find Lei on Twitter at LeiXing77. That's LEIXING77. If you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you grab your podcast from, we'd appreciate that as well. Even better, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends about it. Please join us again next week as we track down all the latest news on China, EVs, and more.